All right, welcome everybody today to our Hyperion Solutions Conference. I'm going to be giving an introduction to strategic modeling. So a little bit about us. We're five-time EPM and Analytics Partner of the Year. We've won several awards. We've got 6 Oracle ACE and ACE directors. We're full service. We've got some great partnerships, and we're very experienced. Those are key points. You probably know us from the Look Smarter Than You Are books if you've been in the Hyperion world for a while. We've had virtual conferences. We have many Play It Forward videos. I encourage you to go check those out, particularly in one from me. I got to get my views up compared to Edward and some of the other people. And we also have a finance newsletter that we put out. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Oracle Certified Specialist. I've been doing this for over 15 years. I've had functional roles within FP&A and Treasury. That's when I first got exposed to Hyperion Strategic Finance, was working in a FP&A group at US Airways and using the product, and then later coming in and implementing the product and then seeing how it evolved as it got put into the cloud. I presented at KScope and Collaborate and got a couple of degrees on that. So what I'd like to go through today is the agenda. I want to talk about the importance of planning strategically. And then I'm going to give you an introduction and an overview of strategic modeling in the cloud. I'm going to go through the models, going to get into a little bit of detail, give you a taste of what it really looks like. Then I'm going to talk about integrating with it, and then a little bit about the scenario modeling, particularly nowadays, how scenarios, everything's kind of up in the air and everything's changing. It's important to have good scenario modeling, and then maybe some quick tips and tricks. So 2020, a year to remember. Actually, it's a year to survive. A lot's been going on with the Australian wildfires. We had Russia and Saudi Arabia, an oil crisis. Of course, there's the global pandemic. There's civil unrest, hurricanes, wildfires, and even the royal family is having some issues. So what can we do when the world's spinning out of control? Well, we can do scenario planning. One of the things we really talk about now is timeliness over precision. Before, you can sit there and make everything perfect and have your plans be completely wiped out by the next thing that happens. So it's really important to have things that are quick and agile, being able to really focus on what's important and you might lose some of the detail, but if you can really be agile, it's a lot more important than being perfect. So one of the great quotes from Eisenhower was, "I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." It's the process of creating a plan where you truly learn your business. What levers do I have? How can I make a pivot? That's really what I need to do. So it's more about the process and really understanding your business, because at the end of the day, the numbers may change once a new input comes in or the world changes just a little bit. But if you have the process down, you can really flex and move things around and really understand your business. So as one of the fathers of planning has talked about, it said the real purpose of effective planning is not to make plans, but to change the mental models that the decision makers carry in their heads. The key is, what's the point of putting all these numbers onto a sheet if you're not actually going to make a different decision? So the point is, make it quick, make it something I can make a decision by, and the ability to learn faster than your competitors is the only sustainable competitive advantage. So how quickly are you able to move and make changes? So in these unprecedented times, we need to be able to be nimble in our reactions. We need to understand what is happening in our business and what's happening around the world. We need to be constantly challenging the status quo. We need to be able to forecast for multiple scenarios. Maybe different regions have different recovery patterns. If we have operations all over the world. You might have different business units having different results. Like Disney has theme parks versus streaming. Streaming is way up, theme parks are down because they're being closed. So how can we survive a slower, longer recovery? So typically what I've seen for the long-range planning process is you have your financial planning and analysis group, and they're going to create an income statement, and they're going to go down to about the EBIT level, the operating income. Then Treasury is going to come in and create a balance sheet. And then you're going to have some CapEx assumptions that might link between the two. And then it's going to integrate in the areas below the line. This is where your depreciation, amortization, your interest income expense, and all that stuff. And now I've got a full financial statement. But cash flows are often an afterthought. But right now, cash is king. Companies that have stronger balance sheets are better able to survive tough times. So here's like a feedback loop that I've seen with a long-range planning process. So you're in the center, you're going to start with your corporate FP&A and Treasury teams, and they're going to be creating top-down regional targets. They're going to be putting these into the planning models. Then you're going to have your regional FP&A teams. They're going to have really specific, detailed access to what's happening in their different regions. So they're going to be building up their forecasts and budgets. Those forecasts and budgets then get put into a strategic model. And then corporate FP&A teams will come in and tweak the strategic model. They're going to push that into an S-based reporting cube. And now I've got a target, and we've got this continual feedback loop where the corporate FP&A and the regional teams really start getting into understanding where they need to be from a corporate side and how they're going to get there from the regional and FP&A side. So how would we work this with the data flow? Well, we might have, if we have ePBCS, say, we have the ePBCS or Oracle Planning Cloud or whatever we're calling it now. It's going to have your frameworks like CapEx, projects, workforce. And that's where you're going to get detailed like headcount information and that stuff. That feeds into the financials module. You might also have a GL or HFM or EBS or something like that. And that's where you're going to get your actuals fed into your financials. And you might have other sources. And then you're also going to have your regional teams working on planning forms, and that's also going to feed into your financials. So this is going to build you a nice, sophisticated, short-range forecast, what's happening now, where we're looking with our actuals getting fed in. And then what we can do is take that and feed that into a strategic model. We also might have some Excel schedules, maybe coming from debt from a treasury team or something like that, that are going to be feeding also into strategic modeling. Then we take that strategic model, we forecast what our company is going to look like, push it back into S-base, so now it can be digested by the masses and sliced and diced as we'd like. And it also could feed back into financials as maybe a target scenario. So maybe you have a high-level target scenario. This is where we'd like to be to have our strategy work out, and a lower one saying this is where we see we are from a regional perspective. Excuse me. So let's get into an introduction into the strategic modeling, the actual product here. So this comes with Oracle Planning Cloud. You're going to enable it like the other frameworks, but unlike the other frameworks, it is not S-base based. So there is no S-base underneath it. It's its own financial accounting engine. On May 13th, Oracle is now offering it for free to all existing Planning Cloud customers. Before, if you had PBCS, not the ePBCS, this was not available, and now they're offering it to everybody because they're really understanding through these unprecedented times that people really need to have the flexibility of having a strong long-range plan and have strategic modeling with that. You integrate using Groovy scripting or data maps, and this is how you can get data in between your ePBCS and your S-base based functions and your strategic modeling. There's also, you can use the navigation flows, so you can kind of make it seamless for the users. It would just look like another card, but that may actually be a report out of strategic modeling. And the point of it all is really to give you the creation of agile strategic plans and give you what-if scenario analysis. One of the things you start off with is it's also based in SmartView. So a lot of the finance people are really more comfortable in Excel. And this also helps to get buy-in from groups that say, you're still going to be using Excel, but you're just going to have an extra ribbon. So what you do is you just download it from there. You run it as administrator. And it's going to create a panel for you. On the right, when you open up your panel now, you're going to see strategic modeling with your consolidations and your models and your templates. And then you're going to get another ribbon as well that's going to come across and give you all these new options. So at the heart of strategic modeling are the models. They used to be called entities on the on-prem, but they didn't want to get it as confused with entities that are in planning now that it's a lot more integrated. Before, when it was on-premise, HSF was a completely different program you bought separately. And now it's, like I said, it's just basically integrated, and you just turn it on like you turn on the other frameworks. Each model, as soon as you create a model, it's going to have an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow. These are going to be completely integrated using the accounting engine. You check in and you check out your models. This is to help maintain version controls, because a lot of times you're going to have several groups working on one model. This is because you have your treasury groups and your FP&A groups, and you don't want to have people overwriting each other. What you do is you create these models and you link them together in a consolidation view. I'll describe a little bit more of that later. And you can also set your security. A lot of times these models can have sensitive information. There's a lot of times there's considerations if you're doing M&A and you have divestitures, obviously that's pretty sensitive. So you can set your security accordingly. So when you're building a model and you're deciding what level of my company do I create a model at, you may be looking at your legal structure. Maybe it's geographic. Again, if you're thinking about M&A, then you're going to have what does it look like if I get rid of or add this new company? You might want to see what your different scenarios are, so you kind of understand different parts of your business. You could go down to the plant or the store level, but like if you're like Starbucks, that wouldn't make any sense because it would just get too unwieldy at that point. So the engine that runs this all is really the funding options. This is the balancing routine. So it maintains your accounting integrity. This is why your balance sheet will always balance. As you go through different scenarios, you're going to see different impacts on your cash. And what this does is you can kind of see at the bottom here is I can apply cash surplus. And what's the pecking order? So maybe I actually have figure out this is all going to be working out really well for me, maybe on like a Zoom video or something like that. And I'm going to have excess marketable, I'm going to pay down my revolver first, and then I'm going to stack it into excess marketable securities. But on the other side, say you're a movie theater or something, you're having issues with your cash deficits. How do I fund those cash deficits? Well, first, maybe I'm going to use off my cash and cash equivalents, my market securities. Maybe then I'm going to start drawing on my revolver, see how big that revolver gets. And then once that gets to its limits, then maybe I need to start taking out some long-term debt. So as I'm modeling different scenarios, I'm going to need to see how bad things are going to look. And do I need to start talking to the bank? Do I need to start talking about my revolver? Do I need to see if I can increase that? What's that going to look like? And this is all going to be going through like based on my revenue drivers or something like that as every model flows all the way through down to the cash flow statements. So how do I create a new strategic model? It's pretty simple. You're just going to open up strategic modeling. You're going to create new, you're going to give it a name. And you could start, if you have nothing before, you can start from a template. And you can see that there's different templates based on different industries. You have financials, healthcare, retail, etc. And what these different templates will give you is maybe some different reports, maybe a few different accounts, but it's basically the same engine. You can also create models off of other models, and that's something that you'd want to do. Maybe you start with one, you get a model down, and then now I'm going to expand it to different business units or different geographies, but the base part will be the same. So you basically create a model off of a template or of another model. You go through the wizard, and you're going to put in your, how many years of it it's going to be, when does your fiscal year starts and ends, what granularity of each year do I want to see, yearly, quarterly, monthly, etc. And then once you do this, you're already ready to begin forecasting. So once you've built your model, or once you've created a model, your first thing you're going to open up is going to be account view. And this is going to have the main area. It's going to have every single account, every income statement, balance sheet, memo, cash flow. It's all going to be here in one just giant list. So one of the things you're going to want to do is start grouping it using account groups, so I can start seeing things together that makes sense to me. So I basically pick which accounts will work. Which is nice, as opposed to just having an income statement. I can also put in some balance sheet items. Say I'm working on some sort of debt, and I also want to see the interest expense and interest income stuff that don't necessarily all live on the balance sheet together. With accounting groups, I can put everything together so I can see everything in one spot. Now, the way the account and the account integrity works is all the accounts are predefined and they're permanently linked. So what happens is I'm going to always have sales. It's always going to be V1000. I could change the name to revenue or whatever I want to do it, but it's going to act like sales. But if this isn't enough granularity for you, you do have the ability to sub-account. You can kind of see here what I've done is I have sales, but now I've sub-accounted it to product sales, service revenues, and maintenance revenue. And they're all going to roll up to sales. So sales is always going to run up, go down. It's going to subtract out my expenses. It's going to change my net income. It's going to go through retained earnings on the balance sheet. So I'm always permanently linked. So it's always going to balance, and that's the beauty of it. So when you take a look more at how the accounts are set up, I have two lines for each account, and I have the output and the input. So you can see the blue part, and I've kind of highlighted this with product sales. You can see forecast as a growth rate. In the actual periods, I just have the actual numbers. But if you notice, as I go on to the forecast periods, the input is 10, and I've chosen a growth rate. And so this is like a driver-based growth rate of 10%. So it takes that 548 and it grows it by 10% and comes out with the 603. And then if I'm growing it by 15% the next year, the same thing. So you kind of see how the inputs and the outputs work. So the forecasting methods, you have two choices. You can either do right out of the box. I have great options that you're going to use most of the time. Actual value, if I just want to write in the numbers. If I have a growth rate year over year. Percentages of another accounts, that can happen a lot, like with SG&A, maybe I want it as a percentage of revenue or something like that. You can do days and turns as you're getting into some of your inventory accounts and multiples of other things. Like if I wanted to do multiples over LIBOR or something like that for some of my debts. Then you have the ability to freeform. You can do this account forecasting, and you can just use any logic you can think of. I mean, it's a different language than, say, any of the other S-based stuff. It's not count scripting. It's a little bit more on the, I would call it like Excel kind of based. So it's a little easier maybe for finance people to kind of create their freeform formulas, but you really have a lot of flexibility, a lot of functions to basically create any type of account that, any type of formulas that you need. And then later I'll talk about the audit trail, and you can actually get back and see how you've created your formulas, which is really nice. So as I said, you have the audit trail. So this is really what's providing transparency into how you get your numbers. A lot of times, one of the major things with having financial models, and particularly when you're presenting to executives and board of directors, et cetera, they want to be able to understand and trust your numbers. Where did this number come from? So, and this is simple. This is just one. I took a report. I clicked on non-operating profit, and when you click on that, I see the 141. It opens up. You open up the audit trail. This again is available in Smart View. I'm just showing you the web view. You can pick your non-operating profits, and you can see that it's taking your taxable income, you're subtracting your taxable operating expenses, and then adding back your interest expense. And if I come in and say, well, that interest expense looks a little funky, what's 74 million? I don't know where that came from. I can now click on that 74 million and drill back into understanding where the total interest expense. And on certain accounts, you can drill all the way back into the input, and I can actually start changing some of the inputs from this screen. So again, this audit trail is really a great way to kind of really understand what makes up your numbers without having to go through a lot of hassle to figure out where all the pieces are. Another piece that you can do, and particularly now, you might want to be using goal seeking. What do I need if I want to keep my dividends at the same level? Or where's my drop dead without, when I run out of cash, or that kind of stuff? What you do, it's similar to the Excel goal seek. Is you're going to set a goal, you're going to say a target, and you can say I'm going to adjust it by the same percentage. I can do it for amount of time and the same amount. I can do it over a range of periods, and say, again, what do I need to have a net income of 100 million, 150 million in the future? If I change my revenue, what kind of assumptions do I need to get there? So here's a little demo on forecasting methods and goal seek. So you can kind of see what it looks like inside. You can see I open up strategic modeling, go into a model view. These are my different models that I've created. You kind of see I did it a bit of a regional. I'm opening and checking it out. And this means now I have access, so it is locked to anybody else. You can see I have an account group of revenue drivers, and here's my forecast methods. So as I come in and I see that my sales is forecast as a growth rate, well, I can come in and change that forecast. And as I'd mentioned, out of the methods out of the box, I can change it to an actual value. I had my growth rate, I had my percentage of other accounts, but now I've changed it to an actual value. So if I come in here, it's basically like in Excel, the equivalent would be hard coding the numbers. So I have the ability to do this. I do have another ability using the hashtag and the pound sign, however you want to call it, and overwriting it manually if I wanted to keep that as a growth rate, or I can just create this to become my forecast by doing an actual result. So one of the new things they've added, which is really nice for the nerds like me, You have simulations. What you can really do now is you can really type in ways that you can adjust your forecasting. So what this does is say, I have ability to change the distribution and the ways it's going to look, the assumptions. So if I'm on the bottom here, I've taken volume, and I say, you know, I'm not exactly sure what the volume is going to look like, but I'm pretty sure it's going to fall somewhere into this bell curve with this min and max and kind of a standard deviation here. And then maybe on the bottom right, I'm looking at the price, and I said it's really just going to be between these numbers. There's not going to be a full range. It's going to be a lot more of a uniform distribution into it. And then what I'm going to do is plug this in through a Monte Carlo simulation, which basically will plug in assumptions, and I could pick how many trials. I did 500 trials. You know, it's just going to take longer, however many you want to do. But it's going to spit through all these with the assumptions that my unit volume is going to be a normal distribution, my prices are going to be uniform distribution, what's it going to look like? And so now it's telling me that my product sales is going to be 6.1 million, and I have a 51% chance of achieving this. Then if I look at my best and worst case scenarios, I might be making $5.6 million versus $6.7 million. Those are the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile. So it's really kind of a neat way to kind of take some of the assumptions and then have the computer do all the work for determining what your chances of achieving your revenue or whatever, you know, net income, et cetera, or cash type of because you can use this on any of the accounts, possibility of achieving those results. So this is all great, but how do I integrate with it? Well, there's really two easy ways that are out of there. There's Groovy and there's the data exchange, the data maps. Groovy is very flexible. You can do all sorts of complex mapping. You do scalings and all that. But it is a whole nother language. And if you don't know Groovy, this could be quite intimidating to learn. And it's a bit of a learning curve on that. And it's going to be higher maintenance. You actually have to go in there. The data exchange or the data maps is easy for non-coders. Again, you're going to have probably a lot of finance people in here. It's going to have a graphical interface. You can download it to an Excel template, so you don't have to type in or click each time for each account. You can just kind of multiple do it. It's not as flexible, and it's not going to have scaling. So just an idea of what it looks like. You can kind of see there's some Groovy code up there. And at the bottom is a data map where you just basically you have your source and your target. I'm going to select a model, is going to go to an entity. Which scenarios do I want to go through? And then I can start selecting accounts. So again, the data maps has a lot more user-friendly integration. And then the Groovy is a little bit more powerful. So a big part of this is scenario modeling for particularly the environment we live in right now. You can use scenarios to quickly compare the impact of different decisions. Since nobody's going to know what's going to happen, you really need to know, if this goes like this, what are we going to do? If the recovery doesn't, if we're a restaurant and they're going to keep us at 25% capacity for the next 6 months, what's that going to be like versus if we get to open up in January and have 100% capacity? We don't know that answer, so we need to model those scenarios to really understand how they're going to impact our business. Do we take advantage of what's happening right now and maybe acquire a new division, or do we need to sell off a division? Do we suspend our dividends? What do we do with our cash? How's that going to look? So, you might have airlines are losing business travelers, so now we're going to switch to cargo. What does that look like for us if we keep continuing this? Or if business travelers come back in July of next year, is that going to look different for us than if they come back in January? You have apparel companies that are making business casual, and they're like, now we got to do athleisure wear, more yoga pants, that kind of stuff. People's working from home. Movie theaters, how long are we going to be able to survive? Again, restaurants trying to model with lower capacities. So all these, you don't have those answers right now, but you really, back to the beginning of it, you really need to model your scenarios to really understand if this starts to happen, what do we need to do? And when do we get into real trouble, or when do we start making different decisions that are going to help us survive? So in scenario managers, you can create multiple scenarios for comparison against the base. So you can have a delayed recovery, or you have prolonged contraction scenarios, etc. And then you have the ability to inherit scenarios from each other. And that way it saves you on a lot of the typings because you kind of have your base, and those things will only change certain parts of the scenario. Maybe I only want to start changing my volumes or maybe my revenues or something like that. You can inherit all the rest of the model, so you're not typing it in every single scenario. So here's a little bit of a demo of creating a scenario. So you basically just come in, you add it, you go to the scenario manager, you create it, you give it a name like prolonged contraction, and you can do like scenario 1, because we might have several scenarios depending on how long it is. I can put in a description here, and the description is going to give me an ability to go back and say, what was the details on this? Oh, this is when we're going to have a slow start recovery in 2021, and then a mitigation, and the mitigation steps we're going to have in this one. This is where I can either do a standalone scenario where it's completely separate from the base, or I can have it inherit from others like the base, or if I did an upside and I wanted to have different, I was doing different initiatives to try to mitigate the different results. So I have that ability within the scenario manager. I can also, use actuals. And then once you've created it, as I come through the different reports or the different, you see my account groups, I have a drop-down list of my different scenarios. And now if I wanted to see how the revenue drivers are going to look, again, I created a group here that has the different revenue drivers, different like product mix and different sales and stuff. I'm going to come in and I could start putting in some new forecast numbers for my sales. I'm doing this forecasted as direct. And as I calculate it, it's also nice on the web version. You can see how when I calculate it, it'll highlight all the places that it's changed, things that are driven off of each other. I can see that so pretty much everything here was forecast as a percentage of my revenue. Therefore, all that stuff changed. Now, if I go to one of the reports, these are the built-in reports. This comes right out of the box. I can start seeing the scenario for my drop-down list, for my balance sheet, my cash flows, and all that. So I can easily change scenarios anytime I want to go look at different recovery scenarios. I also have the ability to create a custom report where I might want to put scenarios side by side. And that way I can do comparisons of different what ifs. Then what we do, as I mentioned, when we're creating the models, we have a consolidation view. What we do is we take these models and we are going to arrange them into a hierarchy to allow for combining them for different accounting methods. So I have the ability to do a method like full consolidation, minority interest. If you have a JV or something like that, you can model this out. I have different ownership percentages I can change. And again, this is a way to get a good feel of my corporation. And again, when I was just talking at the very beginning about creating a model, this is a little bit what you want to think about. How does my company look as a whole? Do I have different regions as I kind of show here, or do I have different units, operating units that are completely different? And I want to be able to model these separately. And though getting back into the scenario piece, now I have the ability to operate different scenarios based on each model. So I can have one model is going to have a premium pricing strategy, I can upside case, a downside case, etc. Then what I do is I combine these all into a business case. You can kind of say this is what I was going to give to the board of directors with the acquisition that we were planning. So now I was going to go through just a few of the design tips and tricks. So one of the common issues I've seen when we've been implementing strategic modeling is overcomplicating the models. You've got groups that have been building these models over and over again in Excel, and they try to fit every single aspect of the business into a long-range plan. We had one client was arguing about a 0.01 difference in 2030 or something like that, a long-range way out there. And if you're getting into that piece, you're really missing the flexibility of it. And I said, if you have it immaterial all the way out there and you're so focused on that, then you lose agility. Anytime you want to go in and try to make a change, you've got all these different factors you've got to try to play in. So it's going to take you forever to try to get that next model out. And when you've got somebody coming in from the executives saying, okay, what's going to happen if this just hit the news now? What are we going to do now? We just came up with a vaccine. How does that look? Okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks. That's not going to be acceptable. You're going to have to be able to come in and out and come with a very agile forecast. And if you get it down to too much level of detail, you're going to lose all that. You also have maintenance. Next time you want to change something, if you got to go into 45 different places to try to make a change, you're going to miss things. So really, you want to make your strategic model enough that it's going to be important, enough that the numbers matter, but you can't get it down to too detailed a level of granularity. The other issue we've seen is change management. It's people that say, oh, you can't take my Excel away. Well, fortunately with SmartView, we kind of can say, hey, listen, we're not taking your Excel away. We're not taking that stuff, but you really kind of need to get on board with this new tool because there's always going to be a detractor, and that makes it a lot more difficult to get long-term acceptance, particularly if you want to make this the core of your strategy planning. You're going to need people on board from all the different groups like Treasury and FP&A and all that. You're going to have to understand that, this is the one source of the truth. Let's use this model and not go with a whole bunch of complex offline models that might make it more irrelevant in the future, because it's you really need to be concentrated on just one quick, agile, corporate-wide strategy. I've also had issues where they didn't believe the model because my numbers were different than theirs, and their numbers have to be right because they presented it to the board. And after digging and digging and digging and digging, I found, something was hard coded and it was a there was a ref error, and something else got hard coded in their Excel model and didn't link right. And therefore the number that they presented to the board was wrong. So they don't want to admit that but because of the way this always balances, the way that it's in there and it's forecasted, I can drill back and be pretty confident of my number. Where if you're going through an Excel sheet with 200 tabs and they all have different little things, and then, it was rushed out the night before because the board of directors meeting was this, and they just gave you some new input and you're up all night. And then next time you just use that same Excel sheet and now you've overwritten it, but you forgot about that you did this one hard-coded piece. It becomes a mess, and it's sometimes people have hard times letting go. So the key is to get the strategy right first, and then you start building the models around it. So why am I building a long-range plan? What am I really thinking? What questions am I going to answer with this? What types of things are going to get thrown at me at the last minute by the executive management? How am I going to be able to answer those? Well, that's why I need a long-range plan. That's why I need a strong long-range plan. So now let's start thinking about how our company is built. Again, are we going to want to do regional, or are we going to want to do business units, et cetera? How am I going to want to look at that corporate to make the point of them giving them the right information very quickly to make those important decisions? As I said, you really need to get change management, because you may be coming into, as you start looking at it, and particularly as everything's changing now, maybe we haven't really been looking at our business in the right way. We have these Excel models, and maybe they have some good information in them, but I don't just need to try to force my Excel model into becoming a strategic model up in the cloud. I really need to understand my business, and maybe I have some details in there that are important, but I want to be able to use, I want people to come in and buy this as a tool. The other thing is, this is an evolving product. When we first started, one of the first ones, there was a lot of issues using the Oracle SR system. They were very supportive. We actually had weekly meetings with them, just kind of tagging in with what issues we're finding, and it's evolving. And the more that you use that, the SRs and the ERs, the enhancement requests, that's really important to provide feedback, because that's going to help the whole community as we all move forward. And, again, the whole thing with the cloud is that it's very evolving. It's always getting better every time. Another tip is trying to use the functionality that's built in there. I mentioned before building things into account groups. You don't want to have to scroll through thousands of accounts to figure out what I'm working on. And then if I'm working on maybe a CapEx thing or something like that, I now have the balances, and if I want to see how that's going to impact the income statement, I don't want to have to scroll way up, see what that line is. Okay, now let's scroll back down. What number did I pick? If you put them all into an account group, I have it all on one quick screen. I just do a drag drop, and here it is. Everything's nice, ready to go. You want to leverage that account audit trail whenever you can, because you can do it all the way from reports. And now I've got that transparency. You're going to be seeing that. I think you'll be using that quite a bit. I've had clients before trying to ask me how they do this in the regular planning parts. And I'm like, well, it's not in planning, it's just in the strategic modeling. But it does provide a lot of transparency and drill back. If you have the ability to use the debt scheduler, it's kind of nice because there's a lot of pieces to debt. You know, there's the interest expense, there's short-term and long-term liabilities. Where does it flow through the cash flow statement, etc. So having that, using the debt scheduler, you basically come in and you can tag, you can talk about, like, you know, your term, principal and interest payments, how that all works. You can model that out pretty nicely. It depends on, you know, some clients I've had too, where it's just way too complex. Like if you're working with an airline with hundreds of EETCs, the enhanced equipment trusts, whatever certificates, there's very complex models. Some of that might just be easier to have Treasury build that and then just give you the answers, you know, your interest expense, your liabilities, etc. Another thing is using the consolidation functionality. So again, figure out where your models are going to look, how you're going to put the models into a group, and then how you're going to have them roll up. Another tip is to build a master model. If you have similar parts of a company, you want to build maybe one model, get it really, really detailed, get it understanding, working how you want it, because then you can just take that model and then you use that as a template for your other parts of the group. So that way you don't have to rebuild it every time and don't have it in too many places. So the more upfront you can put into the one master model and use that as a template, the better. There's also change management stuff that you can do now that's been released, you know, in the last several months that allows you to push changes through several models, which is nice because you don't want to, you know, if you have a whole bunch of models, so you have 20, 30 models building up your company, you make a change, you don't want to have to open up 30 different models and make that change 30 different times, things you can kind of push through. Or if you had that upfront effort, then it was already going to be baked into the other models. So it's a little bit of a summary. I know I'm kind of a quick talker here, but I wanted to go through the importance of strategic planning. I wanted to give an introduction to strategic modeling in the Oracle Planning Cloud, giving you an overview, kind of walking through what a model is, and built up into the models of the accounts, how you do forecasting and driver-based forecasting out of your those accounts for your models. A little bit on the reports, how they consolidate, and some of the features. And we talked a bit about integrating it with strategic modeling. Went through some scenario modeling, how the scenarios work and how to get different what-if answers, and some design tips and tricks. So thank you. Let's see if there's any Q&A. Can any user create their own formulas in free-form account forecasting, or is it reserved for admins? Again, it's how you're going to have your access set. Typically, too, just because of the nature of this product, it's not always the wider group that has access to this. Maybe you have maybe a select group within FP&A and a couple people from Treasury. So you might have, like, you know, half a dozen or, you know, dozen type people that are in this. So it's not everybody. Will the presentation be available later? Yes, I think all the presentations are going to be available at some point. Do we get a recording of reporting analytics? Oh, yes. Also was a comment on the music from before. I have to thank Ali for that. All right, looks like we got about 5 more minutes. So if you have any more questions, please use the Q&A. And if there's any more questions.
Kevin, it looks like a question came in actually through the chat box from Andrew Callahan.
Let's see, chat. I actually don't see that. Do you mind reading it for me?
Yeah, sure thing.
Unless it was just for the panel.
Sure thing. It says, can you comment quickly on a migration from on-prem HSF to strategic modeling? Things to keep in mind.
Yes. One of the things is you want to get that to 11.124, and then it actually is set to migrate fairly easily. Saving your models. You can do it like manually. I've done it a couple different ways. It depends on, you know, if there's any issues with it, but you can save your model and then open it up basically in the cloud version is one way you can kind of manually do it. And another way is if, oh, it was because we changed the application name, and so there were some more issues. You can actually get into the XML files and do some find and replaces in there. It's a little bit trickier, but if you kind of know where to look within those, you can get into those on-prem XML files and make changes and then move those up into the cloud. So it is set to try to make it, you know, push everybody from, because they're no longer upgrading any more of the HSF on-prem. They're all focused on the cloud. So there is definite different migration tactics for that. All right, any more questions?
Yep, sorry, one more just came through. How does the support work for on-premise since there is no HFS 11.2?
I think the support is going to remain the same. I'm not sure if it's going to be out till 2030, I guess not, because 11.2 they mentioned, or 2032, whatever they mentioned in the keynote this morning. I'm not sure how that's going to happen with HSF, with that support. But yeah, it wasn't going to be 11.2. They weren't going to have any more.
I know we just have a few more minutes, so we can kind of just see if any other questions.
I see one up there. Is there any key functionality lost in migration from on-prem to the cloud? The data maps that was in the on-prem connecting to Essbase and stuff like that, that's changed a bit. So it's a little bit different. There was an assumptions change management, I think. There's a few things, but they're all on the roadmap. And now you've gotten additional functionality with things like the Monte Carlo simulations that is now on the cloud, that is not available on-prem. But the key basics of it, you really have everything that's going to be into the cloud now. And again, this has been going on for the last few years. Every Friday of every month, I mean, you get that upgrade, and they're upgrading everything within it too. So they're constantly improving it, and they have a roadmap, and Oracle has kind of committed to like, this is going to be a key part of their product, is kind of the strategic modeling, kind of starting everything from the strategy. So they've been really diligent in upgrading this, and easy to work with the development team. If there's features and functions that are, you know, you think should be available, they can make sure that those are available.
And then looks like we had just one more come through the chat. So it said, could you please let me know how to approach for the initial strategic modeling, in parentheses, the company they're not currently using scenario modeling.
Okay, so it's just trying to figure out how to start using the scenario modeling, or how to approach the executives on why you would want this product. I would say, you know, you can watch, you know, the video. There's a short, you know, video too that I did. What is it, to get an idea of what it does, but you really kind of want to start thinking what ifs. Talk to people that are having issues right now, particularly now. I'm sure that there's going to be lots of questions that are getting fired at people. What do we do if this happens, or how are we going to handle this? Start saying, well, you know, this strategic modeling is going to be something that's going to help answer those questions. That's going to help you get numbers pretty quickly, and then kind of get a feel for how to use it. If you have the Oracle Planning Cloud, then again, you just basically enable it. And you can even start using it. It won't mess up anything else you're doing. It won't change anything. And unlike, you know, kind of enabling Workforce, which is a bigger deal, this is a very small, there's just one click basically to start enabling. You start playing with it, and it lives kind of off on the side, and then you could start integrating it as you start using it more. You start understanding how it works. What is the maximum database size available for all strategic finances? In the cloud, HSF databases can get quite large in size. Yes, and they don't actually do it the same way with the databases as they did. It's more just individual models. On-prem, they had databases that were collections of the models. That's going to be a little piece of how the your cloud works, and it's kind of, that's one of the things that Oracle's trying to take behind the curtain and how big things are. I haven't seen anything that's mentioned limits on sizes on all that, but they do get big, and that's one of the things you try to use. Hopefully that's how the cloud's set up, is so you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Because I just recently did an on-prem project and I forgot about things like, oh, I've got to make sure the server has enough room. Like, you don't even think about that stuff once it gets to the cloud. So if it is going to be a problem, I think you'll need to maybe discuss it with your sales rep if it's going to be that big. But typically, its size should not be an issue.